Hi, John here, the Hat Guy. Today I want to talk about woolly mammoths. Where'd they go and why'd they go away? I gotta change my hat. Now I'm ready. I want to talk about woolly mammoths. For years, many years, in places like northern Canada and Siberia and all over these Arctic areas that are cold all the time, they find woolly mammoths frozen, intact, completely whole, intact, wool still intact, everything. And I've wondered about that. As you can probably tell from my hat, I am a Christian. I believe the Bible. I believe it completely. I also believe in the flood. And I wondered how woolly mammoths fit into that. I do have a theory. I know that's shocking to everyone, but I have a theory. My theory is they died. They froze to death. Of course, we knew that. But how and when? And when does the Ice Age fit into all of this? Let's assume for a minute that I'm correct and that my belief is true and that the Bible is accurate and that a worldwide flood destroyed everything except for 8 people on a really big boat and a bunch of animals. Assuming all of that as fact, because if you're going to deny that part, then everything else I'm going to say is going to be argumentative, and I don't want to argue with people. I just want to lay the facts out as I understand them. But the fact is that the Bible tells us that there was a worldwide flood. And we could go into why and who survived and all of that. But most people, I think, know the basic story. A guy named Noah and all of his family, 8 people in total, built a big boat, put 2 of all the animals on it, and survived. Okay? There's a lot of stories in cultures all over the world, cultures that don't have the Bible, that still have a flood history. At any rate, I'm not going to go down that road. I want to talk about woolly mammoths. Well, we know there was an ice age. We see evidence of there being an ice age. Well, when did that happen? The theory that I go with that makes the most sense to me is called the Canopy theory. The Canopy theory states that before the flood, there was a canopy of ice above the atmosphere. Now, before you start asking, well, how does it stay there? Well, the Earth has a magnetic field. And super cold ice is magnetic. And depending on how it's charged, it would float above the atmosphere, float above the magnetic field. Now, in doing that, that would cause a couple of things to happen. That would cause a higher atmospheric pressure because the atmosphere is contained. And the Bible tells us there were no oceans prior to that. There were seas, but there weren't oceans. And there was more land mass, and with a higher atmospheric pressure and more land mass and more plants, then you're going to have higher oxygen content. And with a higher oxygen content and higher atmospheric pressure, you're going to have animals that grow bigger and live longer, and things will be different. The climate will be different. At any rate, these woolly mammoths, we know they existed because we find them. What got me to thinking about it, though, was a few years ago, several years ago, in fact, scientists analyzed one of these woolly mammoths that they found. I think they found it in either Alaska or Canada. And it was completely intact. And they thawed it out and analyzed the content of its stomach. The stomach had tropical plants inside, undigested. And that's an interesting fact all by itself. That means that it didn't just drop over and die and then manage to get covered by mud and not decay. Because even after the animal would die, the acids in the stomach would still process the food, at least for a little while. So there would be nothing left in the stomach after a period of time. Well, this, and it still had some of the plants in its teeth. And for an animal that is basically an oversized elephant, it's an herbivore, which means it grazes. And to support a body that size, it grazes a lot. So it eats plants. And it's living in a climate that our science today tells us is nearly devoid of plant life. And we find these animals all over these frozen areas. And yet there's almost no plant life there at all. Certainly not enough to support a mammoth. So that's why I think the canopy theory is accurate for that. The canopy theory would contain the atmosphere, and it would also filter off the UV rays from the sun. All of these the dangerous rays that come down from the sun, the gamma rays, the UV rays, all that stuff would be filtered out. And without those, our bodies wouldn't decay as fast. And that's why people lived longer before the flood in the Bible. It's as simple as that. There are two things that filter out those rays: concrete and water. If you lived underwater or under a concrete roof all your life, you would probably live really long. But you could never go out and see the sun. That's the theory. The other aspect to that is the tilt of the Earth. The Earth is tilted slightly. I'll show you what I mean. You can see that if this is sitting level, there's a tilt to the Earth, and the pole is up here and down here. If it were tilted this way, not tilted at all rather, straight up and down, with a canopy over it containing the atmosphere, you would have a temperate climate, warm climate, over all of the globe. But with it at that angle, that's what produces the seasons and the direction the sun hits it. It makes part of the one hemisphere cold for part of the year and the other hemisphere hot part of the year. And then it reverses. When it's wintertime up here, it's summertime down here. And then when it's wintertime down here, it's summertime up here. It's just the way it works. People in Australia, their summertime is January. So the theory I have is that something struck the Earth. To sum it up simply, God wanted to destroy the Earth, so he threw a rock at it. Meteor, asteroid, comet, doesn't matter. Some large body. And the scientists agree that that's what killed the dinosaurs, that we were struck by a meteor. I actually believe that part. I think they're wrong on when it happened, but that's irrelevant. I think they're right that that's what happened. I think that's what caused the flood. I think it's also what caused the Ice Age. The magnetic field is at its high point at the equator, and it comes down, it's at its low point at the poles. That's the way it works. It comes into the poles and comes out, and then back into the other pole. It's around the whole Earth. This ice canopy would sit on top of that, so it would be at a low point at the poles. So if a meteor, or an asteroid, or a comet, comes in and strikes the Earth, hits it here, it's going to shatter that ice canopy, which will then slowly make its way to the poles, which forms the Ice Age. But it's also going to cause the Earth to tilt. The impact would be so great that it would alter the tilt of the Earth. That happened again recently with the explosion in Japan at the nuclear facility that happened a couple of years ago. They say that it actually altered the tilt of the Earth fractionally, but it did alter it. So a big asteroid or meteor or comet striking the Earth would also tilt the Earth. So you've got the canopy which was protecting us is gone. The Earth is now tilted. And that is what happened to the woolly mammoths. They froze rapidly. Well, that triggered the flood. Now, the Bible tells us there were these water chambers under the earth that burst forth. You got North and South America, you got Africa, and Europe up here. And this is the Atlantic Ocean. And this line right here is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. That's all underwater. It's a giant mountain range underwater. And it has a crack right at the peak of it that goes down. Now what I think that is that was one of the underground water chambers. And when it burst, all that water shot out and rained down over the whole earth. And it did the same thing over here. One of the things people say when you put that theory out is, well, what happened to all the water, John? Water's all right there. 70% of this planet is covered with water. It just filled in the low spots. If you had a giant underground water chamber, a giant cavern filled with water right here, and that burst open and all that water came out, it was under pressure, and all that water came out and rained back down, ultimately that part of the world will collapse, causing this deep hole that all the water then drains and settles into. And it took about a year. That's what the Bible tells us. And that makes sense logically when you look at it that way. But that's my theory on what happened to the woolly mammoths. They froze right before the flood in what triggered the Ice Age. And that's my opinion. I'm the Hat Guy. If you like this kind of thought and this kind of conversation, be sure to check out my other channel called Good News and Sandals. That's a religious-based nonprofit. I've got a couple of videos up there where we're talking about the end time events, the book of Revelation, and more are coming. I'm processing those as we speak. Be sure and check those out. Give a like, do a subscribe on both channels, and have a great weekend.